And then we'll move on to the second paper of this morning's session, which is by Federica Nicolardi, who is an assistant professor of papyrology at the University of Naples, Federico II. Professor Nicolardi works on Herculaneum Papyri, both the texts but also the materiality, reconstruction of rolls, which, as you may have gathered from the previous presentation, is a very important part of scholarship. She prepares editions of Herculaneum Papyri, and she also works on the digitization of these papyri. The title of her paper is Eye on the Papyrus, Role and Challenges of Papyrological Expertise from the Facsimiles to AI-enabled virtual unwrapping of Herculaneum rolls. Please join me in welcoming Professor Nicolardi.
Thank you so much. So the aim of my paper today is to show the role of papyrology in facing challenges or complicated, deceptive situations, and also to show you some of the methodologies, or to give you an overview of the methodologies we have been trying to use, we've been using to overcome some old and some new problems. So first of all, the first deception, probably pretty obvious, is that the number of inventory numbers in the collection, as David Blank was saying before, is not the number of books that were originally housed in the library of the Villa dei Papyri. And this is due to a big problem, the problem of fragmentation. Fragmentation happened in various different moments in the history of the collection. It happened, of course, during the eruption in 79 AD, it happened during the excavations, and it happened, as we saw before in the talk before mine, during the unwrapping and the opening procedures of the collection. And what happened with fragmentation? What happened is that we lost any connection between the scorze and the midolli, and between different pieces belonging to the same papyrus, to the same roll, originally belonging to the same roll. We lost connection between the top and the bottom of the same roll, for example. And so this is the reason why a papyrologist who is dealing with Herculaneum Papyri has to engage in reconstruction, and this is very important. And I will show you an example of an excellent reconstruction by Richard Janko, and here you can see how he was able to put together different fragments that bear different inventory numbers in the collection back to their original position in the roll. So this is what actually all the reconstruction should look like at the end. We should be able to put all the fragments back in their original position in the roll. And I'm showing you here the beginning of a paper that David Blank published in the Chronica Herculaneum in 2008, matching tops and bottoms, which is very inspiring. I'm not showing it to you because it's one of the most encouraging papers on Herculaneum Papyri. It is not. Probably if you just read a couple of lines, you will understand that it's not particularly encouraging, but it is the truth, and this was very inspiring to me when I was starting my work on reconstruction of Herculaneum Papyri, because this paper really enlightens the importance of engaging a reconstruction task, which is fundamental. Reconstruction is not an aim in itself. We don't have fun making reconstruction of papyri. It can be fun sometimes, but it can also be very frustrating. But it's really important because it allows us to build a context for the papyrus and for the text we're trying to recover from the damaged papyrus. And I would like to show you an example. So I mentioned fragmentation, and we have big issues with the arrangement of the pieces. We need, as we saw before, we need to put back all the papyrus pieces into their original position and try to think about their arrangement in the original papyrus. And this can also be difficult when we have just one inventory number, as in the case of PR 1044 that I'm showing right now. This is the papyrus I've been studying. And this is a papyrus preserving a biographical work on an Epicurean philosopher who was at the Seleucid court in Syria in the 2nd century BC. So this papyrus is preserved in 13 cornici, frames or trays, as we want to call them in English. But the arrangement that the papyrus had at the beginning is more or less this one. And you can see in this slide there are some numbers that are present more than once, and this is because even in the same cornice, even in the same frame, we have sometimes pieces that belong to a different part of the roll. So this is the reason why throughout the years we developed some methodology for the reconstruction based on different criteria. Some criteria can be pretty basic or can look like being pretty basic or obvious, like text or content, which is very important because they can enable us to join fragments together, and they tell us something about the relative position, but not about the absolute position of fragments in the original scroll. There are paleographical criteria, of course, because as we saw before, there are fragments there are rolls that have been scattered in the collection, divided, separated in different inventory numbers. And so it is very important to look at the script, but I also have to say that there were scribes who wrote more than one papyrus, so it's not the only criterion you might want to be using. And so there are other more technical methodologies based on material aspects and bibliological data. For example, we may have some numbers, like the numbers of the columns. If you are pretty lucky, you will be able to find a number of the column in the margin of the papyrus. But there are also some geometrical assimilations and calculations based on inventory data that are very important and that can give us a lot of information about the position of fragments in the original scroll. I will not dwell on that, but I would rather talk about the result of a reconstruction. The result is a reconstruction model. This is an image that is familiar to many of you, and this is one of the reconstruction. It is a paper-based model built by Richard Bianco again, and the paper-based model has an advantage. It is the fact that you have the chance to have a more direct idea of what the original papyrus looked like, but it also has some disadvantages, of course. Not only that you need a very long table, but also that it is difficult when you have to work with a lot of fragments and you have a lot of uncertainty about their positioning. You have to cut and paste and recut and repaste and throw away a lot of paper. So, and also for a user, it's not particularly, of course, it's not possible to consult that reconstruction model, which is in fact very important for the work, for the editorial work. So this is the reason why at some point Daniel Delattre, who produced the paper-based model, decided to also have it digitized. So his edition of Philodemus of Music included a CD-ROM with a digital version of the paper-based model. And the same thing happened also with Giuliana Leone's edition of Epicurus on Nature, Book 2. And when I started working on on Philodemus and Rhetoric, Book 1, which was also a role that needed to be reconstructed, I tried to work with a paper-based model, but very soon I said, no, that's not for me, I can't do that. And I tried to find a way to start from a born digital model using a software tool, Photoshop, that many of you may know, which was, of course, not conceived for virtual reconstruction of papyri. But it gave me the opportunity to work on a digital model, and then the digital model could also be printed, of course, and it was printed together with the book. And that has become a sort of a standard. Also, the following book that was published in the collection La Scuola di Epicuro by Marzia D'Angelo, including a work by Philodemus of Gadra on theology, a theological work, included a printed version of a born digital model. what is a model? We call it maquette in Herculaneum papyrology, using the French term because it was the term Daniel Delattre used in 2007. A digital model basically tried to reproduce the basic structure of the scroll in terms following two different criteria. A material criterion, which is the volutes or the circumferences of the roll, which fairly steadily diminished towards the end of the scroll, and on the other side, a bibliological criterion, so the alternation between columns and intercolumns. And in particular, it is very important to consider the unit of the roll as a book, which is a column width plus intercolumn width, which is normally pretty regular in the roll. So in Naples right now we are trying to develop a digital tool specifically conceived for virtual reconstruction of papyrus scrolls, and with some functionalities, as I will show, specifically focused on problems of Herculaneum papyri. I'm doing this work with my colleague Marzia D'Angelo in Naples and with Florent Noël of Curious Company within the framework of a project called Recreate and funded by the Fritz Thyssen Stiftung. And I would like to show you something. I will be very quick on this, and I will be happy to answer any questions on this digital tool. So this is pretty much everything that Make It, our software tool, can do for now. So focusing on the first part, which is the more general, as these are the steps that can be helpful for everyone that's working on the reconstruction of a papyrus scroll, even if it's not coming from Herculaneum. What you can do, I have some videos that I will show. What you can do is basically you can upload images, and you can upload just a single fragment if you want, or you can upload a whole cornice, for example, and then you have the chance to remove the background and select just the images that you want to move. And then you can scale the images, which was a problem because the Brigham Young University images, the infrared images, didn't have scale in themselves, weren't scaled all in the same way. So it is very important for us to be able to scale the fragments in the digital model itself. And then you have the opportunity to enter and to input all the basic data of the reconstruction model, the criteria I was talking about before. So on one side, the circumferences, and on the other side, column and intercolumn, and then you have the possibility to manually adjust it or to add more columns at the end or at the beginning of the digital model, more circumferences, more column as you want. But the arrangement of fragments of pieces is not the only problem when you're dealing with Herculaneum papyri. The other problem was somehow presented also by David Blank. It is a problem of, we call it stratigraphy, and it's a problem of the high cohesion between the scrolls volutes. It happened very often during the unrolling, especially during the unrolling with Piaget's machine that you can see here on to the left of the slide. It happened very often that several layers remain stuck, remain attached one to another due to this extreme cohesion of the scroll. And you can see on the right here, a stack of different layers remained attached together. So you can find yourself in front of a situation like that when you have you struggle finding the regular alternation between columns and intercolumns because the main surface of the papyrus is disturbed, is in a way disturbed by the presence of other overlapping layers. And these overlapping layers need to be repositioned back to their original position. We call them sovrapposti and sottoposti. We call sovrapposto a fragment that has remained attached over the main surface, and a sottoposto fragment that has remained attached under the base surface of the scroll. I will not dwell much about this because it gets very technical, but I tried, in 2019, I tried to systematize a bit the methodology to reposition these fragments back to their original position in a paper that I published on the Cronache Herculanesi. And at that time, Marzia, my colleague, she was working on a papyrus with complex stratigraphy, and we found ourselves thinking that the rules that came out of this paper could be used for a software tool, so to instruct a software tool to help us in the reconstruction. And so we go now to the lower part of this the circle, where we have some of the functionalities that are specifically conceived for the Herculaneum Papyri. So for example, you can select a layer. Here you have a lasso tool or any other selection tool that you would like to be using. You can select the layer that, the fragment that needs to be repositioned, and the software tool will automatically move it according to the volutes you input before. And we decided also to add some warning messages. So for now, the software tool tells you if you're doing something that is not, that's illegal, let's say, that goes against the rules of stratigraphy. So this is what we have for now. We hosted a first event in June 2024 in Naples, where we had a nice workshop with people interested in reconstruction of papyrus scrolls. But we want to do more on this digital tool, and for January 2025 we plan to have a smarter make it, and we would like to have not only the warning messages anymore, but some kind of layer predictions based on the rules 2019 paper. And we would like to add more tools, for example, the possibility to mark collezes, so the sheets that made up the scroll, or to include disegni, or to mark and measure mass law in the roll, the possibility to add some text boxes to be able to transcribe or to make notes or something like that. And then at the end of the project, which will be around the end of October 2025, we would like to have, by the end of the project, we would like to have a more comprehensive tool for papyrus reconstruction, which will also include some tools for calculations, so to be able to calculate the total length of a scroll, or to use stichometry to make calculations, or to also use in a more friendlier way the calculations conceived by Holger Essler based on geometrical assimilations. And we will be also experimenting at the end of the project on the use of the 3D images taken by the University of Kentucky and the Deuce Lab in the software tool, and we will experiment also on the use of AI in our tool. So what happens when you're working with a reconstructed roll? It happens that a user that is reading your edition, if he wants to find that specific place in the papyrus, is going to have a hard time finding that specific place, because the reconstructed scroll doesn't correspond anymore to the papyrus, to original papyrus, or to a specific photograph. So what happens that you're dealing with a digital object, and the digital object you see does not match the current state, the current material aspect of the papyrus. And it also happens often, and the people in this room who work on Herculaneum Papyri know that very well, it happens that you have several representations, several images that you have to consider when you work with Herculaneum Papyri. You may have 2 or even 3 different disegni of the same fragment. You may have historical photographs. You have the infrared images taken at the beginning of this century by the Brigham Young University, and you have now also the Deuce Lab images, including a 3D reconstruction of the cornice and of the pieces. And sometimes it's difficult to decide a priori which is the best option, which is the best image, because it can happen that multiple images provide different readability degree for that specific fragment, or in general for the papyrus. So it is almost never possible to make an a priori selection. And another problem with images, for example, here I'm showing you a tiny detail of a multispectral or an infrared image, a Brigham Young University image. Here, on top of that Omicron, you will have the impression that you can see like a circle of ink, perhaps another Omicron or something like that. But if you go to the library and look at the papyrus, or if you have the chance to look at a papyrus at a visible light image, you will see very clearly that that is not ink at all. It's just a hole. And so we're kind of used to this kind of artifacts or false impressions with images. So what is important here is that the papyrologist has to understand the process that led to that mistake, let's say, to be able to trust that representation. And this happened also with the disegni, for example, the facsimiles that were taken, especially with stratigraphy and with the problem of overlapping layers. It was very difficult for the people who were sketching the disegni to understand the difference between layers. So it happens sometimes that you find a whole text that is completely making no sense in Greek because it's made up of different layers, different pieces of text coming from different layers. And also in the case, it is particularly important for us to understand what happened there, to be able to think, okay, can we trust this disegnatore? Can we trust this disegno? And this leads me to the final part of my talk about virtual unwrapping, because also here we will see that there were some old problems. There are some things that we were already used to, even if in a different way. So you all know probably this papyrus is Papyrus 4, and this is the virtual unwrapping made by people in this room. And this is the transcription we made. This is an important thing. AI does not read papyri for now. AI reveals the ink, and the papyrology team read the papyrus, the text in here, and this is the text we submitted in a paper to the Cronache Herculanesi. It will be out very soon, probably during this month or beginning of next month. And you all know about the Vesuvius challenge, so I will not talk much about it. We'll see here you have the papyrology team from 2023, and now the papyrology team has increased its number, and now we have another papyrology team, or a richer papyrology team, which includes also Michael McCusker, who is here, and other young scholars that are experts in Herculaneum papyrology. So this is not very different to what we said before. So even in this case, it's not a reconstructed papyrus, it's a revealed papyrus roll, but it's the same thing. So we all know, it's even more true in this case, that the actual material aspect, the actual papyrus, will never resemble in any way the digital object we are looking at. Plus, there is also some sort of ephemeral nature we have to accept, and that is the fact that the results are going to improve, and our text will be probably very soon outdated because it will be possible to recover more, from that same strip of papyrus. So for now we have recover more or less 5% of the whole scroll, and everything is a digital lacuna. So it's not a real lacuna. It's a lacuna for now, but we will be able to read more at some point, even in the lower part of the columns that were already revealed and discovered. And then talking about multiple images, when we had to evaluate the results of the grand prize, we were supposed to rank the different submissions. So we compare them, and I worked like this. I overlapped all the different layers in a Photoshop file to be able to switch back and forth between one and another. And this actually was pretty helpful. So even if the image from the winners was emerging in terms of readability, there were some cases where it was really helpful for me to be able to look at other images. So this is another case where an a priori selection can be difficult, and where multiple images can provide some different readability. And the last point, are there artifacts in these images? Yes, I'm sorry to say that, but there are some artifacts. And this is the first one we found when we were transcribing the text from the first Letters Prize image. And we were able to read pretty quickly the word Thaumasion here, but we noticed very soon that there was something going on there. There was a sinusoidal stroke to the right part of the mu, which didn't make any sense. And when we received the grand prize images, we were able to compare them with the previous one, and we noticed that other images that were less precise in terms of readability show that sinusoidal stroke less. So I thought, okay, so maybe that it was just noise in the image, and the AI or machine learning just misinterpreted it and thought it was ink, and so connected some noise traces instead of ink. And this is interesting. I would like to show you the difference in the transcription between the first letters prize and the grand prize. So even if this piece of papyrus was already present in the images from the first letters prize, the readability degree is completely different. And we were actually able to read the whole text here. So this is a good ephemeral nature, but still it's there. We had just published a paper with the first transcription, and we received those other images. So we had to retranscribe everything and resubmit another paper, which was, of course, very exciting. But it's also something that we are not very used to. And then there were other interesting artifacts, like in this case, at the end of the line, you have the impression to see an omega, but the text didn't make any sense with an omega, so I tried, let me see if this is something just like a pattern that is repeated twice. And actually, it was exactly like this, so there was probably a problem with the merging of different images in this case, and our papyrological and philological skills actually allowed us to understand that there was something going on in this image in terms of artifacts or something like that. And even in this case, we were struggling with reading the last part of this line, and at some point I said, okay, maybe I should move this tiny rectangle a little bit more to the left, and then the article 10 was evident to me. So it is interesting the way we actually noticed these problems just because we were used to work with papyri, with images, with other kinds of artifacts. And the last thing I would like to show you is this one. So when we were transcribing the grand prize text, the grand prize image for the paper that we are going to publish very soon, we noticed that there was something in the intercolumn. So the intercolumn is a blank space between columns, so it is supposed to be blank. But we could see some traces here. You probably see that there is something that looks like a kappa at the bottom of the red circle to the right. But we decided not to transcribe it because we thought that could be a sottoposto, like a digital sottoposto, something coming from the previous circumferences, because it would have been very strange if there were some text there. So the aim of my paper today was not to tell you we still make sense. No, it was not to say AI didn't steal our job, but it was to highlight the importance of collaboration between two different fields, because I really think that this can make a big difference in the readability of the Herculaneum Papyri. Thank you.
We have some time for questions. Richard, yes, so there is a microphone coming to go.
Thank you, Federica, for that splendid paper. The sinusoidal stroke, one wonders, I don't know what you think about this, could it be a wormhole? Because the papyri do have bookworms as well. That was one little observation. And then I wanted to ask about the wonderful digital reconstruction model that you're building. One terrible problem I had with the making the paper model, which at that time seemed to me to be easier than a digital one, was finding the exact size. And the pieces just had to be physically measured and then scaled at the appropriate enlarge or reduce on a photocopier. But it is a problem that the BYU images don't have an exact size. The ones they took of the Devaney papyrus did have a platen and do have an exact size. But even so, I found building a digital model of that papyrus terribly difficult because the columns don't have a regular width. That is, they're written out like verse, and there's no right justification, such as we get in the Herculaneum Papyri, which are later. I wondered whether your model will be able to address that problem, or whether that's going to make it much harder to reconstruct, for example, a Latin papyrus, or more of the poem about the Battle of Actium, which I'd love to get where they can't justify the right end of the verses. Those are my little questions.
Okay, thank you. So about the sinusoidal stroke, it could have been a hole in the papyrus. Even if you look at the video here, you will see that when you reach the last images here, which are the one that we ranked lower in our ranking, the top part of the sinusoidal stroke just disappears. So that's the reason why I thought maybe that was exaggerated noise or something like that. There are probably people who can answer this question better than me about AI. About the digital tool and the columns and intercolumns, I know, of course, we know that the two criteria, especially the columns, are not always there. And so that's the reason why in our first workshop we also had people working on documentary papyri, because we would like to have all the criteria that can possibly help. So for now, you can work on the reconstruction even if you don't have any clue about the column width in the papyrus. Of course, it will be more difficult to work on that. And about the scaling process, so for right now, you can just have an actual measure. So if you go to the library and take a measurement, you can input it into the software tool, and it will automatically resize each image to that corresponding scale. But also the problem will be solved as soon as the Kentucky images will be completely available, because of course the 3D images, they come from a photogrammetry system, so they are scaled, they have measurements, and so and also with the registration tool, I mean, when all the images will be registered together, we won't have the problem of the Brigham Young University images not having a scale.
Thank you to that. Okay. We have time for one brief question. Yes, and there is a microphone.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So about the sinusoidal stroke, did you think about whether it could be a very localized poster?
Yeah, I think I thought about it, but if you have a sovrapposto here, you should have a hole in the following circumference, which we didn't, I think. So there was nothing missing, and also the sinusoidal stroke is very large, it's very high, it's very tall, so it's probably not a part of a whole letter, I think. At least from the, maybe something from the lower part, just tiny bits could come from another, from a sovrapposto, so from another layer. That is possible, perhaps. I should check again the images, but I think there's nothing missing in the following circumference, so there's nothing that led me to think that that is a sovrapposto. But thank you.
Let's thank our speaker again.